London, 1823. The city breathed in quiet order that morning. Carriages rolled over cobblestones with practiced patience, shop windows gleamed with intention, and polite society prepared itself for another day of careful appearances. Nothing was rushed, nothing was spontaneous, everything followed its proper place. And in that order, she felt entirely secure. She had refused her own heart long before anyone ever questioned her choice. From the window of her family's townhouse near Bloomsbury, she observed the street below, with the same calm certainty she applied to most matters of life. People, she believed, were predictable when one knew how to look. Emotions followed patterns. Affection could be encouraged. Attachments could be guided. Love, however, was another matter entirely. Love distracted sensible minds. Love clouded judgment. Love led otherwise intelligent women to make choices they would later defend with embarrassment and regret. She had seen it often enough to decide, early, firmly, that she would never surrender her clarity for such chaos. This conviction did not make her cold. Quite the opposite. She was known for her warmth, her wit, her attentiveness. Guests often left her presence feeling seen, understood, and, more often than not, curiously hopeful about their romantic prospects. It was a talent she exercised with confidence. If she did not trust love for herself, she trusted her understanding of it in others. That morning, she was already planning the evening's gathering, a modest dinner, nothing approaching a ballroom affair, but significant enough to draw notice. London thrived on such occasions, small gatherings where futures shifted quietly between courses, where glances lingered just long enough to spark expectation. She rang the bell for tea and sat at her writing desk, reviewing names in her mind, a young widow with softened grief and renewed curiosity, a gentleman of respectable means, shy but sincere, a duchess who delighted in observation and rumour, a duke whose presence alone altered the atmosphere of any room he entered. She smiled faintly. Arrangements did not make themselves. By the time she arrived at the afternoon promenade later that day, London society had already assembled in its usual rhythm. Ladies walked in measured steps, parasols tilted just so. Gentlemen followed at appropriate distances, conversations unfolding with strategic pauses. She greeted acquaintances easily, offering observations that felt harmless but planted seeds all the same. "You noticed how comfortable they seemed together," she remarked casually to one lady, her tone light. "He listens to her," she suggested to another. "They share a temperament," she added, as though stating a fact rather than shaping a narrative. Most never questioned her certainty. Why would they? She had an eye for such things. It was during one of these exchanges that she became aware of his presence, not because he demanded attention, but because he never did. He stood slightly apart from the group, engaged in polite conversation, yet clearly observing more than participating. His posture was relaxed, his expression composed, though his eyes followed the scene with thoughtful precision. He had watched her before. She sensed it not with discomfort, but with curiosity. He never interrupted her conclusions, never challenged her assessments. When others praised her insight, he simply listened. If she noticed, she gave no indication. If he admired her, he kept it well concealed. Their exchanges, when they occurred, were brief but memorable. "Your confidence inspires it," he once said, when she dismissed her influence on a particular courtship. She laughed lightly at the time, dismissing the comment as courtesy. Confidence was not inspiration, it was protection. That evening's dinner unfolded as she anticipated. The table glowed beneath candlelight, conversation flowing easily. She guided attention subtly, placing remarks where they might encourage comfort, laughter where it might soften reserve. She watched her guests with satisfaction, 2 seats apart, just enough space for curiosity, shared glances across porcelain plates, a gentle smile exchanged during dessert. Everything aligned, almost. It was only when she noticed a certain tension near the end of the evening that something felt slightly unsettled. A gentleman spoke with particular eagerness, his tone carrying an expectation that had not been agreed upon. A lady responded with polite confusion, her expression tightening beneath practiced grace. She frowned faintly. Later, as guests departed and farewells were exchanged, the imbalance became harder to ignore. The gentleman lingered, clearly emboldened by something he believed had been promised. The lady left earlier than expected, her composure strained. For the first time that evening, doubt brushed against her certainty. Not enough to trouble her yet. The following days unfolded with a similar rhythm, but the undertone had shifted. A remark here, a pause there. She began to hear whispers, nothing scandalous, but suggestive. Expectations formed without clarity, feelings assumed without confirmation. She assured herself it was coincidence. After all, misunderstandings happened. She could not be responsible for every interpretation. Still, the gentleman's presence grew more insistent. His confidence now bordered on presumption, and the lady, once hopeful, seemed increasingly withdrawn. It was during a morning visit to a mutual acquaintance that the truth surfaced, unadorned and unavoidable. "She believed you had promised something," the woman said gently, her voice careful. "Or rather, she believed he believed it." The words struck sharper than intended. "I promised nothing," she replied at once. "I know," came the response. "But your encouragement, your certainty, he took it as assurance." Silence followed, not the comfortable kind. For the first time, her clarity faltered. That evening, she walked alone. No promenade, no conversation, just the quiet streets of London and the steady sound of her own thoughts. She replayed her words, her expressions, her confident suggestions. Had she spoken too surely? Had she guided hearts without understanding the weight of her influence? The realization settled slowly, uncomfortably. She had never intended harm. She had believed herself helpful, wise, above the confusion she so easily navigated in others. But intentions did not erase consequences. The next morning, she declined an invitation she would normally accept, and the morning after that, another. She withdrew, not dramatically, but deliberately. No more guidance, no more suggestions, no more certainty offered where it might be mistaken for promise. It was during this quiet retreat that she noticed something she had long ignored. His absence, not from the city, but from her awareness. He had not sought her opinion, had not questioned her silence, had not filled the space she now kept carefully guarded. When she finally encountered him again, days later, it was by chance, a brief exchange, a polite greeting. Yet something in his gaze shifted, not judgment, not disappointment, understanding. "You seem quieter," he observed gently. She smiled, smaller this time. "I am learning." He did not press her. He never had. As they parted, a thought followed her home. Unwanted, persistent. Toggle this. She had spent years organizing the emotions of others, yet she had never once asked herself what she felt. And for the first time, that question felt dangerous. Not because she feared the answer, but because she suspected it had been waiting far longer than she cared to admit. And somewhere between certainty and silence, love, patient, uninvited, remained. Where London watches and quiet doubt becomes dangerous, 2 days after their brief encounter, London behaved as if nothing had happened. Of course it did. London was skilled at continuing forward while carrying 1,000 whispered stories beneath its gloves. Scandal did not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrived with a pause in conversation, a glance held too long, a name repeated twice in the same afternoon, and her name, hers, had begun to do that. Not loudly, not cruelly, but noticeably. That morning, she sat in the family parlor with her embroidery untouched on her lap, pretending to focus on needlework while her mind ran through every recent conversation like a ledger that refused to close. She could still picture the lady's strained smile at dinner, the gentleman's confident tone, the assumption in his eyes, a promise that had never been spoken, yet had somehow been understood. Her mother entered with the air of someone bringing news that was both trivial and irresistible. "My dear," she said, sitting with a sigh, "Lady Ashford called this morning." She kept her expression neutral. "How industrious of her." Her mother ignored the tone. "She is hosting a small ballroom this Friday. Not a grand affair, but enough to draw a duke, a duchess, and half the people who enjoy being seen by both." A ballroom. The word alone was a stage, a threat, and an opportunity. "And?" she asked carefully. Her mother's eyes narrowed with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she was approaching a point, and she specifically asked whether you would attend. "Did she?" she replied, light as air. "How flattering." "It is not merely flattering," her mother said, leaning forward. "It is strategic." She smiled faintly. "Mother, London is always strategic." "Yes," her mother agreed, "but this is London being strategic about you." The embroidery finally fell still. That did it. She rose, walked to the window, and stared out as if the street might offer a simpler answer than her own mind. Carriages passed. A flower seller called softly. A gentleman tipped his hat to a lady with practiced ease. Life continued, and yet she felt exposed, not because of what she had done with malice, but because she had done it with confidence. She had always trusted herself. Now she was not sure she deserved to. That afternoon, she forced herself into the promenade, not because she longed for conversation, but because withdrawal invited suspicion. In London, a lady who disappeared for too long was either ill, engaged, or hiding, and all three fueled speculation. She walked with a friend, one of those companions who spoke in cheerful streams and rarely noticed the storms in other people's faces. "You look refined today," her friend remarked. "Very composed." She nearly laughed. Composed was simply what one looked like when one had no intention of letting the world see how unsteady her thoughts were. They passed familiar faces, bowed, smiled, exchanged light remarks. Then she saw him again. He stood near a cluster of gentlemen, listening more than speaking, his posture easy, his presence calm. A duke stood nearby, taller, louder in a quiet way, with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. A duchess watched the scene like it was theatre written for her amusement, and he was neither the duke nor the duchess. He was something more inconvenient. He noticed her immediately, not dramatically. Not with the kind of stare that embarrassed a woman into blushing, but with attention that felt like truth. As she drew nearer, the Duke's voice carried, "And you would imagine she must be pleased," the Duke said, clearly discussing someone not present. "A man of good standing showing interest is hardly an insult." The Duchess lifted her brow. "That depends on the man, and on the woman." The Duke scoffed. "Women are too delicate these days. A hint of attention, and they collapse into poetry." Her friend leaned close. "Who are they speaking of?" She answered without thinking. "A misunderstanding." Her friend's eyes widened. "Oh, is it about—" She cut her off with a small, firm smile. "Let us not." Her friend obeyed, mostly because she enjoyed mystery but feared social error. The Duchess's gaze swept toward her, sharp, amused, assessing. Then, with the smoothness of a cat that had decided to be charming, the Duchess smiled. "My dear," she said, drifting closer, "how lovely to see you outside your parlor again. We were beginning to think you'd turned into a legend, rarely seen, frequently discussed." She kept her face calm. "I didn't realize I was so entertaining." "Oh, you are," the Duchess replied sweetly, "especially when you don't intend to be." The Duke chuckled like he owned the moment. He, however, said nothing, but his mouth just barely curved, as if he understood her irritation and quietly approved of it. The Duchess continued, innocent as a blade. "I must ask," she said, "will you attend Lady Ashford's ballroom on Friday?" Her mother's earlier words echoed, "London being strategic about you." She should have answered lightly. She should have smiled and said, "If I am well." Instead, truth slipped out before she could dress it properly. "I suppose I should," she said, "since absence invites invention." The Duchess's eyes gleamed. "Exactly." The Duke nodded as if she had finally behaved correctly. Then the gentleman, him, spoke at last. "Invention thrives even when you are present," he said mildly, "but it does have less freedom." She looked at him, startled by the quiet firmness. And there it was again, the feeling she disliked most, that he saw her more clearly than she saw herself. Later that day, she visited the lady at the center of the misunderstanding, not because she desired humiliation, but because she deserved responsibility. The lady's drawing room was tidy, tasteful, and tense. She sat too straight. Her teacup trembled just slightly in her hand. "I wasn't sure you would come," the lady said. "I wasn't sure I would have the courage," she replied. A pause. Then, with careful honesty, she said what had been avoided too long. "I never promised anything," she began. "Not to him, not to you, not even if I am truthful, not to myself." The lady's lips pressed together. He spoke as if— "I know," she said gently. "And that is the problem. My words encouraged what I did not intend." The lady blinked rapidly, struggling between pride and pain. "I feel foolish," she admitted, "and I feel guilty," she answered. "Not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I believed I knew better." The lady's shoulders softened by an inch. "That is the worst part," the lady whispered. "You always sound so certain." She swallowed. So certain. Yes, that certainty had been her shield and her weapon without her meaning it. "I am learning," she said quietly. "Certainty can be careless." The lady studied her face. Then, unexpectedly, she gave a small laugh, soft and weary. "If you are truly learning," she said, "then perhaps this humiliation will not be wasted on both of us." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like mercy. She stood to leave, and before she reached the door, the lady added, "For what it is worth, I never envied you for your beauty or wit." She paused. "I envied you because you seemed untouched." Her fingers tightened around her gloves. Untouched. She left the house, walking slower than she had arrived, because for the first time, she realized her refusal of love had not been strength, it had been fear disguised as intelligence. That evening, back in her own home, her younger brother wandered into the parlor with the careless confidence of someone who believed the world existed primarily for his entertainment. He stopped, noticed her expression, and grinned. "Oh," he said, "you look like a woman who has discovered consequences." She narrowed her eyes. "You look like a boy who enjoys them when they aren't his." He laughed, dropping into a chair. "London is humming," he said. "Did you know that? It's humming like a beehive. Someone mentioned your name twice at the club today, and neither time was followed by an insult, which is practically a compliment." She stared at him. "Why would men at a club mention my name?" He shrugged. "Because you've become interesting." "I have always been interesting," she replied. He lifted a brow. "Ah, yes, but before you were interesting like a well-written pamphlet. Now you're interesting like a chapter that ends too soon." She hated how accurate that felt. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her brother watched her, then softened just slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, almost sincere. She hesitated. Then, for once, she did not protect herself with wit. "I was wrong," she said quietly. He blinked. Good heavens. Should we ring for the doctor? She shot him a look. He smiled, then, unexpectedly, his tone grew gentler. It happens, he said. But you hate being wrong, don't you? She looked down at her hands. I hate hurting people, she corrected. He nodded once. Then fix it. She looked up sharply. He added, almost casually, and if you can't fix it, at least don't pretend you didn't do it. For a boy who spent most of his time being unserious, he had an annoying ability to become wise at precisely the wrong moment. He stood, headed for the door, then paused. Oh, he said, smiling again. And I would attend Lady Ashford's ballroom if I were you. Why? She asked. He tilted his head. Because someone will try to dance with you. She frowned. That is not a reason. It is when you've spent years pretending no one ever could, he replied, and left. She sat in silence. A ballroom, a duke, a duchess, a city humming, and somewhere inside all of that, a man watching her with quiet patience, a man who did not push, a man who waited. She didn't know why that unsettled her more than any rumor, but it did. Because if he waited long enough, she might eventually have to admit what she felt. And that was the one thing she had never practiced controlling, observed, interpreted, and quietly questioned. London, as it turned out, had excellent timing. Lady Ashford's ballroom glowed with anticipation long before the first note of music filled the air. Chandeliers shimmered like restrained excitement, and polished floors waited patiently for secrets to slip between measured steps. This was not merely an evening of dance, it was an evening of interpretation. And interpretation, she knew too well, was dangerous. She arrived composed as always, her posture perfect, her expression calm, her movements precise. Anyone watching her enter would assume confidence without question. What they could not see was the quiet negotiation unfolding within her. Do not interfere, do not guide, do not assume. She repeated the rules like vows. The Duchess noticed her immediately, of course. She always did. Well, the Duchess murmured to the Duke beside her, eyes sparkling with amusement, our favorite observer has finally entered the stage. The Duke smiled faintly. Let us see whether she watches or participates. She greeted acquaintances with grace, answered remarks with light wit, and resisted every instinct that urged her to gently rearrange the evening like a chessboard she knew by heart. It was harder than she expected. She noticed mismatched pairs drifting too close, conversations tilting toward misunderstanding, a gentleman growing hopeful far too quickly. Her fingers tightened around her fan. Do nothing, she reminded herself. That was when he approached, not abruptly, not with ceremony, simply naturally. You look as though you are attending your own trial, he said softly, offering a bow that was respectful rather than theatrical. She laughed before she could stop herself. That obvious? Only to someone who has spent time watching you, he replied. She met his gaze, surprised again by how little effort it took for him to unsettle her composure. And what would you say I'm on trial for? She asked. Certainty, he said without hesitation. It's a heavy thing to carry. She exhaled, half amused, half unnerved. You make it sound like a crime. In excess, he said gently, it can be. Music began. The room shifted. He extended his hand. May I? He asked. This was dangerous, not because of scandal, not because of gossip, but because this was something she could not control. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Yes, she said. You may. As they moved onto the floor, she felt London watching, not with cruelty, but with curiosity. The Duchess leaned closer to the Duke. Whispers bloomed like flowers that thrived on attention. He led with calm assurance, never pulling, never correcting. Dancing with him felt less like being guided and more like being accompanied. "You've changed," he said quietly as they turned. She stiffened slightly. "Have I?" "You listen more," he continued. "And you hesitate." She smiled faintly. "Those are new habits. Good ones," he said. Her heart responded before her mind could stop it. When the dance ended, she expected release. Instead, she found herself disappointed. They returned to the edge of the ballroom, where conversation resumed as if nothing remarkable had occurred. But something had. She had danced without directing, spoken without steering, felt without analyzing, and London had noticed a word from a most attentive observer. It would be irresponsible of this narrator, who, by the way, sees far more than she admits, to ignore what unfolded beneath Lady Ashford's glittering chandeliers. A woman who once believed herself immune to love has been seen dancing not with strategy, but with sincerity. A gentleman, long patient and curiously silent, has finally stepped into view. Now, dear listener, I ask you, purely out of intellectual curiosity, of course, do you believe she truly misunderstood love? Or did she simply fear recognizing it? If you are inclined to share your opinion, I assure you, I would dearly enjoy reading it. The remainder of the evening unfolded differently for her. She did not arrange conversations. She did not place people together. She did not rescue awkward silences. Instead, she observed, and what she observed unsettled her. Left to their own devices, people revealed truths she had never allowed space for before. Some connections strengthened without guidance. Others collapsed under their own assumptions. Love, she realized, did not require her supervision. But she required honesty. Later that night, as guests departed and candles dimmed, she found herself alone in the empty ballroom, the echo of music lingering like an unanswered question. He approached once more, slower this time. "You did not interfere tonight," he said. "No," she admitted. "Was it difficult?" She smiled, tired but sincere. "More than I expected." He studied her, then spoke with quiet conviction. "You are braver than you believe." She shook her head. "Bravery would have been admitting years ago that I was afraid." "Perhaps," he said, "but courage often arrives late. What matters is that it arrives at all." She looked at him then, not as an observer, not as an arranger of lives, but as a woman standing before a man who saw her clearly. And for the first time, she did not look away. Yet still, she said nothing. Some truths needed time. And love, real love, was patient, where silence becomes louder than certainty. The morning after Lady Ashford's ballroom arrived without ceremony, no letters announcing scandal, no carriage halting dramatically at the door, no whispered warnings delivered with theatrical concern. And yet, the city felt altered. She sensed it while taking her tea, an awareness that did not belong to the room but followed her into it. The porcelain cup warmed her hands, the liquid steadied her breath. Still, her thoughts returned, uninvited, to the cadence of last night's music and the weightless assurance of his hand at her back. She had danced, not to be seen, not to arrange a future, but to be present. That distinction unsettled her more than any rumor ever had. She moved through the house deliberately, refusing to linger by windows, refusing to replay conversations too closely. The habit of self-command was not so easily discarded. If she had learned anything, it was that reflection without discipline became indulgence. And indulgence, well, she had avoided that her entire life. Late in the morning, her mother observed her from across the breakfast table, eyes sharp with maternal intuition. "You slept poorly," her mother said. "I slept sufficiently," she replied. "That is not what I said." She smiled faintly. "It is what I answered." Her mother stirred her tea. "London will talk. London always does." "Yes," her mother said calmly, "but today it will talk about you." She paused, fork hovering above her plate. "And what?" she asked, carefully casual. Will London say? Her mother's gaze softened. That you danced. She almost laughed. That is hardly remarkable. No, her mother agreed. What is remarkable is that you danced without directing anyone else. That caught her. Her mother continued. People noticed. She looked down. That afternoon, she declined 2 invitations, not because she feared speculation, but because she needed distance. The city pressed too close when she felt uncertain, and uncertainty was something she required space to understand. Instead, she walked. London revealed itself differently on foot, less polished, more honest. Shopkeepers called out greetings. Children laughed without regard for reputation. Life existed beyond ballrooms and whispered assessments. It comforted her. She reached a small garden she had visited often in childhood, now quieter, nearly forgotten. A place without expectation. And there, of course, he was not. She had not expected him. And yet, part of her had. She sat on a bench, hands folded neatly in her lap, and allowed herself, just for a moment, to consider what she had spent years avoiding. She had told herself love was disruptive, that it distracted women from sense and independence, that attachment weakened judgment, but the man she had danced with had not diminished her. He had not demanded, not assumed, not rushed. He had simply waited. The realization pressed gently, insistently. Perhaps love was not the danger. Perhaps avoidance was. That evening, the invitation arrived. A small dinner, no spectacle, no ballroom, no audience. His name was not written as the host, but she recognized the hand. Her first instinct was refusal. Her second was honesty. She went. The house was modest for London standards, elegant without arrogance. Candles glowed warmly, and the quiet suggested intention rather than display. He greeted her himself. "I wasn't certain you would come," he admitted. "Neither was I," she replied. They dined without witnesses, conversation unfolding naturally. He did not press her about the ballroom, did not ask for explanations or interpretations. Instead, he spoke of travel, of books, of observations made quietly, without the need to impress. It was disarming. At one point, she laughed, truly laughed, at a remark so dry it nearly escaped notice. The sound surprised them both. "I did not know you laughed like that," he said. "I did not either," she admitted. Silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. It was expectant. She set her glass down carefully. "There is something I should say," she began. He did not interrupt. "I have spent years believing I understood people better than they understood themselves." He nodded slowly. And now I see that I confused observation with authority." He considered this. "That is a difficult realization." "Yes," she said quietly, "especially when one has built a life upon it." He leaned back slightly. "You did not act with cruelty." "No," she replied, "but I acted without humility." His gaze softened. "That is not the same as being unworthy." She looked at him then, truly looked. "You never corrected me," she said, "not once." He smiled faintly. "Because you were not ready to hear it. And now?" He met her eyes. "Now you are asking." The air shifted. Something fragile and dangerous stood between them. Not passion, not declaration, but possibility. She stood to leave shortly after, heart unsteady but resolved. At the door she paused. "You are patient," she said. He inclined his head. "I am." "That patience," she added, "has made me think." He smiled gently. "That was always my intention." She left before she could say more, because she was not ready, but for the first time, she wanted to be. Later that night, alone in her room, she acknowledged a truth that could no longer be dismissed. She had refused her own heart because she feared its demands. But hearts, she was beginning to understand, did not demand. They waited. And the most dangerous thing of all was that hers was beginning to answer, and the heart learns what the mind can no longer deny. London did not reward reflection with patience. If she believed a single quiet dinner and one honest realization would pass unnoticed, the city corrected her swiftly. By the next morning, speculation moved through drawing rooms and tea tables with renewed enthusiasm. Not scandal, not yet, but curiosity sharpened to interest. She felt it in the pauses when she entered a room, in the glances exchanged just before polite smiles returned, in the questions that were almost asked, then delicately avoided. It was astonishing how quickly London sensed a shift. She maintained her composure, of course. Years of practice ensured that no whisper unsettled her outwardly, but inside, something new had begun to stir, an awareness that she was no longer merely observing the city. She was part of its story. That afternoon, she received an invitation she could not ignore, a luncheon hosted by a duchess, intimate in number, precise in purpose. Such gatherings were rarely accidental. They existed to confirm rumors, not create them. She attended. The table was elegant, conversation carefully paced. The Duke present spoke confidently of Parliament. A lady discussed the latest fashions with exaggerated interest, and the Duchess, always the Duchess, watched her like a reader savouring the middle chapters of a promising novel. "My dear," the Duchess said lightly, midway through the meal, "you seem reflective lately." She smiled politely. "I find reflection improves judgment." "Indeed," the Duchess replied, "and yet judgment has never been your difficulty." A pause. Strategic. "I wonder," the Duchess continued, "whether you've grown tired of understanding everyone else." The table fell briefly quiet. She met the Duchess's gaze calmly. "On the contrary, I have grown aware of my limits." The Duchess's smile widened, not cruelly, but with satisfaction. "How refreshing," she murmured. "Self-awareness is so becoming." The luncheon ended without incident, yet she left knowing something had shifted. London had noticed her restraint, and restraint, oddly enough, invited more interest than confidence ever had. That evening, she walked again, not to escape, but to think. The sky dimmed into soft blues and greys as lamps flickered to life. She found herself returning, without conscious decision, to the same garden she had visited days earlier. This time, she was not alone. He stood near the path, hands clasped behind his back, as though the world had placed him there intentionally. "I wondered if you might come," he said. "So did I," she replied. They walked together in companionable silence. The air felt different now, charged, but gentle. No urgency, no pressure. "I hear you have been the subject of discussion," he said mildly. She exhaled. "I always am." "Yes," he said. "But now, for different reasons." She stopped walking. "And what reasons would those be?" He turned to face her fully. "You are changing." Her breath caught, just slightly. "That is not something women are permitted to do quietly," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it is something brave women do regardless." She studied him, searching for expectation. There was none. "I am afraid," she admitted suddenly. He did not seem surprised. "Of love?" he asked gently. "No," she said, "of choosing it, and choosing poorly." He considered this. "Then choose slowly," he said. They reached the edge of the garden, where the path curved out of sight. She stopped again. "There is something I should confess," she said, voice steady despite the weight of the moment. He waited. "I believed myself immune to feeling," she said, "but I was wrong." His gaze softened, but he did not move. "I believed I understood love because I stood outside it," she continued, "but I see now that distance did not make me wiser. It only made me untouched." Silence stretched. Then he spoke. quietly, firmly. "I have loved you for some time." The words landed gently. No demand, no drama. She closed her eyes briefly. "You never said anything." "I did not wish to frighten you," he replied, "or persuade you into something you were not ready to choose." She looked at him then, truly looked. "That was kindness," she said. "It was patience," he corrected. She felt the truth of it settle deep within her. "I cannot promise certainty," she said. "I would not accept it if you did," he answered. She smiled, soft, unguarded. "Then perhaps," she said, "we may begin without promises." He stepped closer, not to claim, but to offer. "I would like that very much." They walked back toward the city together. No declarations made, no vows exchanged, but something essential had changed. She was no longer arranging love for others. She was allowing it for herself. And for the first time, London was not ahead of her story. She was where love learns to walk without direction. If London expected fireworks, it was disappointed. What followed was not scandal, nor sudden declaration, nor hurried attachment. There were no dramatic appearances together, no deliberate positioning at dinners, no whispered exclusivity announced by proximity alone. Instead, there was something far more unsettling: consistency. They encountered one another with regularity that felt almost accidental: a morning visit to a bookshop, an afternoon walk that began with polite distance and ended in comfortable silence, evenings spent in rooms where conversation mattered more than performance. She noticed how carefully he allowed her space, never assuming, never directing, never hurrying. It was, paradoxically, what drew her closer. She found herself anticipating moments rather than orchestrating them, waiting, not for outcome, but for presence. And that, she realized, was entirely new. One afternoon, while they sat in the corner of a quiet library, she watched him study a shelf with earnest concentration. "You choose books the way you choose people," she observed lightly. He glanced at her, amused. "And how would that be?" "Thoughtfully," she said, "without display." He smiled. "You choose ideas the way others choose safety." She frowned slightly. "That sounds unflattering." "On the contrary," he replied, "it is how one grows." The remark stayed with her long after they parted. Yet growth, she was learning, rarely occurred without discomfort. At a small gathering hosted by a distant cousin, she found herself once again in the familiar role of observer. Old habits stirred. She noticed mismatched temperaments, poorly timed remarks, hopeful glances. Her mind moved instinctively toward correction. She stopped herself. Instead, she watched. What she saw unsettled her. Without interference, people revealed themselves more honestly. Some connections dissolved naturally. Others strengthened in ways she never could have predicted. And she felt unnecessary. The realization struck deeper than expected. Later, while standing near the refreshment table, a lady approached her, one she had once guided with certainty. "You seem different," the lady said. "Yes," she replied. "I believe I am." The lady hesitated. "I used to envy your confidence." She smiled faintly. "I used to hide behind it." The lady nodded slowly, as though reassessing a memory she had long accepted as truth. That evening, she and he walked together beneath lantern-lit streets. The air was cool, and conversation drifted easily between seriousness and soft humor. "You no longer watch the room," he remarked. "I'm trying to stay in it," she said. He stopped walking. "That is difficult," he said. "Yes," she admitted, "but worth attempting." He looked at her then, not with admiration, not with expectation, but with something steadier. Respect. And she realized how deeply she valued it. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly. Just enough. Her family noticed, of course. They always did. Her brother, ever perceptive in his irreverence. cornered her one evening with a grin. "You walk differently," he said. She raised a brow. "I beg your pardon. You no longer look like you're managing the world," he continued. "You look like you're living in it." She considered this. "That may be the highest praise I've received," he nodded. "Then I shall repeat it often. And yet, despite the warmth, the understanding, the unspoken agreement, there remained something unaddressed. Not doubt, not reluctance, but truth." One evening, as they sat in her family's drawing room, music playing softly in the background, she turned to him with deliberate calm. "I need to say something," she said. He did not interrupt. "I do not wish to return to who I was," she continued, "but neither do I wish to lose myself in who I might become." He listened carefully. "I need to know," she said, voice steady, "that loving you will not require me to surrender my judgment." He answered without hesitation. "I would never ask for that," he said. "I admire your mind too much." She searched his face for assurance and found it. That night, after he left, she stood at the window for a long time. She had spent years believing love demanded surrender. What she was discovering instead was partnership, and that realization was as frightening as it was freeing, because partnership required courage, not to give up control, but to share it. And quiet resolve is mistaken for weakness. London, having observed her restraint with suspicion, now began to test it. It started subtly, as such things always did. A remark offered with false innocence, a question asked twice in the same afternoon, an invitation that arrived pointedly late. She felt it first, at a tea hosted by a distant relative, where conversation flowed politely until it didn't. "And tell me," a lady said with excessive sweetness, "have you retired from matchmaking entirely, or only selectively?" A ripple of polite laughter followed. She smiled, calm, unbothered. "I've retired from certainty," she replied, "not from kindness." The answer unsettled them more than defensiveness ever could. Later, at a dinner where seating arrangements had clearly been designed to provoke, she found herself placed between two gentlemen whose interest leaned more toward curiosity than sincerity. Across the table, he watched, not possessively, not anxiously, just attentively. She handled the conversation with practiced ease, refusing to be drawn into speculation or flirtation that felt performative. When the evening ended, whispers followed, but none could claim her attention had strayed. Outside, as they walked together, he finally spoke. "They wanted a reaction," he said. "They didn't receive one," she replied. "No," he agreed. "They received composure." She sighed. "Composure is often mistaken for indifference." He stopped walking. "And indifference," he said quietly, "is often mistaken for weakness." She turned to him, surprised. "I am not weak," she said. "I know," he replied, "but London doesn't always recognize strength when it appears without spectacle." She studied his face. "Do you mind?" she asked. "That they test you," he clarified. "That they test us," she said. He smiled faintly. "I would mind," he said, "if you yielded." She felt something steady settle in her chest. "I won't," she said. The test came sooner than expected. A rumor, carefully shaped, subtly circulated, suggested that her recent restraint was not growth, but strategy, that her distance was merely another arrangement, that her quiet courtship was calculated rather than sincere. It reached her through a friend who spoke too quickly and apologized too often. "She says you're only waiting," the friend whispered, "to see who offers more." The insult was sharp, not because it misjudged her motives, but because it questioned her honesty. That evening, she did not retreat. She attended a gathering hosted by the same woman who had begun the rumor. She entered with calm resolve. The room stilled slightly. She crossed the floor directly toward the woman and spoke politely, clearly, and without apology. "I hear I've been the subject of interpretation," she said. The woman stiffened. "I meant no harm." "I believe you," she replied. "But I will not allow my restraint to be mistaken for manipulation." A hush fell. "I no longer arrange outcomes," she continued. "I choose presence, and I choose honesty." She turned. Conversation concluded. Later, he joined her near the window. "You did not need to do that," he said. "Yes," she replied, "I did." He smiled, proud but not surprised. That night, alone, she acknowledged a fear she had not yet voiced. London would not simply accept her change. It would challenge it, and if she wished to love openly, she would have to withstand misinterpretation. The next morning, she received a letter. Not formal, not guarded, from him. "I will never compete for you," it read, "but I will stand with you." She folded the letter carefully, holding it longer than necessary, because in a city that thrived on spectacle, he had chosen something quieter, loyalty. And for the first time, she felt ready for what lay ahead. Because love, she was learning, was not proven by declaration. It was proven by endurance, where restraint becomes a test of the heart. The letter stayed with her longer than she expected. Not in her hand, but in her thoughts. "I will never compete for you, but I will stand with you." It was not romantic in the way novels insisted romance should be. There were no flourishes, no declarations of devotion that demanded response. And yet, it unsettled her far more than any poetic confession ever could, because it asked nothing. And she had built her entire life on managing expectations. For the first time, she wondered whether her restraint, so carefully cultivated, had become another form of control. The thought troubled her enough that she chose distance. Not distance born of fear, but distance chosen with intention. She declined invitations where she knew he would be present. Not abruptly, not suspiciously, just enough to create space. She told herself it was necessary, that clarity required quiet, that she must know whether what she felt could endure absence. London noticed, of course. "She has cooled," someone murmured. "Perhaps she has reconsidered," said another, "or perhaps she was never serious at all." She heard none of it directly, but she felt it, and still she kept her distance. Days passed, then a week. Her routines continued. Morning walks, afternoon reading, evenings spent with family, but something essential felt muted. Conversations blurred. Music failed to hold her attention. Even solitude, once her refuge, felt incomplete. She had chosen silence. Now she had to listen to it. One afternoon, her mother joined her in the sitting room, pretending to examine a letter while clearly examining her daughter instead. "You are quieter again," her mother said. "I am thinking," she replied. Her mother nodded. "Thinking can be useful, but too much of it becomes avoidance." She stiffened slightly. "Of what?" she asked. Her mother looked at her, not critically, not accusingly, but with rare gentleness. "Of being known." The words struck deeper than she expected. That evening, she walked alone. The city felt larger without him beside her, louder, less anchored. She passed the garden, where they had spoken so often, paused, then continued on. She was not ready to return there yet, but fate, it seemed, had its own timing. She encountered him unexpectedly near a bookseller's stall, both of them stopping at the same moment. He looked surprised but not wounded. "Good evening," he said calmly. "Good evening," she replied. A pause settled between them. "I hope you are well," he added. "I am," she said. "I needed time." "I assumed," he replied. She studied his face, searching for reproach. There was none. "I didn't wish to pressure you," he continued, "and I still don't." Her breath caught. "That is what frightened me," she admitted. that you never demand reassurance." He smiled softly. "Because I trust your integrity." The weight of that trust pressed heavily. They walked together briefly, conversation careful but honest. Before parting, she stopped. "There is something I must decide," she said, "and I must do it without guidance, yours or anyone else's." He inclined his head. "Then I will wait." She watched him go, heart unsteady but clearer than before. That night, alone, she finally admitted the truth she had resisted. She did not fear loving him. She feared loving him and still choosing herself. But perhaps that was not a contradiction. Perhaps it was the point. Because love, she now understood, was not about surrendering one's mind. It was about trusting one's heart to walk beside it, and for the first time, she knew exactly what she would choose. All that remained was the courage to speak it. Where observation turns into choice, London sensed it before she did. The city always did. There was a pause in her appearances that felt intentional rather than uncertain. A calm in her manner that no longer read as distance, but as decision forming quietly beneath the surface. The whispers returned, not sharper, but more curious. "She is waiting," some said. "She is deciding," others guessed. And a few, always dramatic, insisted she was about to retreat entirely. They were wrong. She was not retreating. She was arriving. That morning, she woke with an unfamiliar clarity. Not certainty, the kind she once wore like armor, but resolve. The softer, steadier kind that came from alignment rather than control. She dressed without overthinking, walked without destination, and found herself inevitably back at the garden. He was there, not pacing, not watching the path with expectation, simply present. "I hoped I might find you," she said. "And I hoped," he replied gently, "that if you did, it would be because you wished to." She smiled, heart steady now. They sat together on the familiar bench, silence settling comfortably between them. "I chose distance," she said, "not to test you, but to test myself." "I know," he replied. "I needed to be certain," she continued, "that what I felt was not habit, nor reaction, nor fear of change." "And?" he asked, not pressing. "And I learned something difficult," she said softly. He waited. "I learned that loving you does not diminish me," she said. "It steadies me." His breath slowed, but he did not interrupt. "I spent years guiding others because it felt safer than choosing for myself," she admitted. "But I no longer wish to stand apart from my own life." She turned to face him fully. "I do not promise perfection," she said. "I do not promise ease, but I do promise honesty, partnership, and the courage to grow." Only then did he move, just slightly closer. "That," he said, voice low and sure, "is everything I hoped for. Now, dear listener, permit this narrator a moment of indulgence. A woman long known for arranging hearts has finally allowed her own to speak. A gentleman who loved without interruption has been rewarded not with spectacle, but with truth. And so I ask you, yes, you, do you believe love is proven by bold declarations, or by patience, respect, and the courage to wait? If you feel inclined, I would truly love to read your thoughts in the comments. After all, what is a good story without a few discerning opinions? They walked back toward the city together, not as spectacle, not as announcement, but as equals. London noticed. It always did. But this time the city did not dictate the narrative. She did. That evening, at a small gathering where eyes lingered and curiosity sharpened, she did not avoid him. She chose him. They spoke openly, laughed easily, stood side by side without explanation. When someone attempted to draw her into speculation, she declined. When another hinted at future arrangements, she smiled and said nothing. Her silence was no longer avoidance. It was assurance. Later, As they stood beneath lamplight outside her family's home, he turned to her with unguarded sincerity. "I would walk with you," he said, "whatever pace you choose." She looked at him, truly looked, and felt no urge to analyze, guide, or hesitate. "Then walk with me," she said. He reached for her hand. She did not pull away, and in that simple, unmistakable gesture, London finally understood. The woman who once refused her own heart had not been waiting for love to prove itself. Love had been waiting for her to grow. Where growth becomes choice, and choice becomes home, London, for once, was not ahead of her. It followed. The days that came after her decision unfolded without urgency, without spectacle, without the kind of dramatic upheaval the city so dearly loved. There was no sudden announcement, no orchestrated revelation meant to satisfy curiosity, and that, perhaps, was the most radical thing she had ever done. She allowed love to exist without explanation. They were seen together, yes, but not arranged, walking side by side through familiar streets, sharing quiet laughter at small gatherings, standing near one another without performing closeness for an audience. The Duchess observed. The Duke assessed. London whispered, but none of it altered her. She had crossed a threshold that rumour could no longer pull her back across. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across her family's sitting room, she found herself alone with him, in a silence that felt neither heavy nor expectant, simply right. "I once believed love required direction," she said thoughtfully, "that it needed guidance to survive." "And now?" he asked. "And now I see," she continued, "that it requires trust far more than control." He smiled. "You've always trusted your mind." "Yes," she replied. "I had to learn to trust my heart without surrendering it." He studied her carefully. "You have not surrendered," he said. "You have arrived." The words stayed with her. The moment itself came without warning. No audience, no pressure, no carefully planned timing. They were walking, just walking through a quieter part of the city, conversation drifting between observations and memories. The late afternoon light softened the world around them. He stopped, not abruptly, not dramatically, simply decisively. "There is something I would like to ask you," he said. She felt no fear, only stillness. "I do not wish to promise what cannot be guaranteed," he continued. "Life will challenge us. London will misunderstand us, and certainty will never belong entirely to either of us." She listened. "But I know this," he said. "I want to walk beside you, not ahead of you, not behind you, and never in place of you." He reached for her hands. "I love you," he said simply, "and if you would choose it, I would like to make that choice permanent, not as a strategy, not as a solution, but as a partnership." There were no grand gestures, no kneeling meant for witnesses, only sincerity. She did not answer immediately, not because she hesitated, but because she honored the moment. "I once believed marriage was the end of independence," she said quietly, "that it required surrendering judgment and self." He waited. "I see now," she continued, "that the right partnership does not ask for less of who we are, but more." She smiled. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." He exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath for years. He pulled her into an embrace that felt neither possessive nor uncertain. It felt inevitable. London would hear of it soon enough. But for now, the world narrowed to the truth they shared. The announcement, when it came, was understated. Some were surprised. Some claimed they had known all along. A few insisted it had been obvious from the beginning. She listened politely and smiled, because none of them truly understood what it had taken. She had not been waiting for love to prove itself. She had been learning how to grow into it. On the evening of their engagement, she stood at the window of her family home, watching the city she had once believed she understood completely. She understood it differently now. London was not a board to arrange. It was a place to live. She had spent years organizing affection from a distance, convinced it protected her clarity. But clarity, she realized, did not come from standing apart. It came from choosing honestly. And love, true love, had not arrived to disrupt her life. It had arrived to walk beside it. She refused her own heart because she believed control was safety. She played matchmaker because it allowed her to avoid vulnerability. And she learned, slowly, bravely, that love does not weaken judgment, it refines it. Love waited, not because it was passive, but because growth cannot be rushed.